Hey there gamers, welcome back to the Board Game Co channel, and today we have a preview of Cosmic Conquest. Well, hey there gamers, it's Professor Meg here, and welcome back to the Board Game Co channel. Today we have a preview of Cosmic Conquest. Thank you to Rising Empire Studios for sponsoring this video, and there's a GameFound link down below that you can check out now to see everything that they have planned for their campaign, because this is a current crowdfunding campaign. Everything that you see in front of you is a prototype and subject to change, but with that we are going to take a look at Cosmic Conquest. Now in Cosmic Conquest, players are going to be facing off against each other as these different types of titans known as contenders. Now within the contenders there are a few different roles that you'll have, and every player will have 3 different units, and you will use this to move around the different planets and fight against other people and just take control of any empty planets that you can to gain points on these gambit tracks, and whichever player reaches 20 gambit points first will win the game, unless this round counter does reach 0. It's currently at 10, and that will count down throughout the rounds. If that does hit 0, whoever has the most gambit points would win, but you will be maneuvering around these different planets with your group of contenders trying to gain these gambit points. Now, players are going to gain these gambit points when they take over the different planets, whether they are conquering or overthrowing them, and they will also gain points when they engage in different combats or when they heal their own units if you're able to heal a certain amount. But before we get into exactly what you would gain for the different gambit points, I'm going to go over the turn order so you can see the general pace of play of how the units are going to move around the board. So at the beginning of the game, you are going to start off with 3 different characters. As I said, they are your contenders, but you need 1 of each category. So you can see here that there is a Savior, Destroyer, and Sentinel, and that's really going to determine the types of roles that these units are going to be able to add as contenders to your team. Now, please note that I have one side set up over here with the Unrivaled side up, and one side set up here with the Awakened side up. To become Awakened, you would have to spend 5 experience points, and this is something that you can either do at the beginning of the game during setup to start with an Awakened contender, or you are always able to awaken them later as you gain experience points throughout the game. But please note, this is not typical of how a game would be set up between one player versus the other, because I have this entire team showing as Awakened, which you wouldn't be able to do at the beginning, and this entire team showing as Unrivaled, and that's just to show you visually a bit about how they're different. Now, as I'm sure you may have already guessed before we move on, but just to make that super clear, they are double-sided, so it is just flipping the character over to that side once you pay the experience points to make them awakened. Now, going through your turn in Cosmic Conquest, first you are going to go through a recovery phase. During the recovery phase, you're going to reduce your contender cooldowns by 1. There are these cooldown dials for the abilities that you have on your awakened side, so if you did use it and it was not at 0, you would then reduce it by 1. For example, this character here has a cooldown of 3 for each of their special abilities. After that, you'll resolve any effects or abilities that would trigger during this particular phase, and after that is when you could awaken any of the contenders you control, as long as you have the experience points to do so. The next phase is the Armory phase, and that is going to be this row of cards here. This is what you will also be spending your experience points on, which is why you may spend a bit at the beginning of the game, and it may take you time to awaken your different contenders, because all of these cards have different variable costs to them, and they will have different effects throughout the game. I'll get into exactly what those are when we go over the cards, but just know that during this phase is when you would purchase any of these with the XP that you have available, and you can also always pay 2 XP to restock the Armory, meaning that you would wipe the available cards and be able to have a fresh new set of cards available to choose from. Now the next phase is the action phase, where players are going to be taking actions throughout the game, and this is where a majority of the conflict and moving around the board is going to take place. Now, the first thing you are able to do is move. When you move, you are able to move to an adjacent planet with your contenders, or to any planet that you currently occupy. When you occupy planets, you will take the planet's card to show that you have ownership for it, and you will also gain a passive ability. So to be able to take ownership of a planet, you would have to conquest it, which would be in the next phase, but during this phase you would move to hopefully try to take control of it. Another thing that you are able to do is engage in combat against an opposing contender occupying the same planet, meaning that if you're here, you would be able to move over to this planet here and then engage in combat with this player. Finally, another thing that you are able to do on your turn is pay 2 XP to traverse to anywhere on the board. So even if we were here at the beginning of our turn, you would be able to pay 2 XP to traverse over to here to also engage in combat. Now, during the action phase, players are going to perform 2 of these actions that I just mentioned. So, for example, if we were here, you would have to traverse to be able to engage in combat, because you would have to use 2 moves, 1, 2, to be your only 2 actions for the turn if you were moving like that. Now, the next thing that players will be doing is the Conquest phase, and that is when you'll be taking control of the different planets. So, for example, here in Synthoria, to be able to conquer the planet, an opposing contender loses 8 or more health this turn. That's something that you would not be able to do staying on this planet. You would have to come in and attack someone here for that to be able to happen, but to be able to overthrow, 2 opposing contenders lose 4 or more health this turn. So to be able to overthrow this particular area, you can see where it is more difficult because you have to be able to attack 2 of the contenders as opposed to just 1. But it does give this passive ability, which is opposing awakened contenders can only reroll 1 defender die during the reroll step when a contender you control is attacking. We'll get into exactly what that means in a minute, but as you can imagine, having less dice to roll during a certain phase is definitely bad. Now, taking a look at Earth over here, just to give you another example, to be able to conquer Earth, the final combat value had 4 or more matching symbols during a combat phase this turn, and to be able to overthrow, you have to have a final combat value of 5 or more matching symbols during that turn. Now, as I noted during the action phase, you will gain an XP for everyone who is engaged in a battle, but you will also gain 1 XP whenever you conquer or overthrow a certain planet. You'll also get gambit points too, and as I said, I'll go over all of the gambit points at the end so that you understand everything that you would gain points for, but you would also gain an experience point when you conquer or overthrow. Now, that is the entire cycle of the turn order, where players are going to go through the recovery phase where they gain XP and reduce their cooldowns. They can awaken any of their contenders, and then they will move on to the armory phase where they're able to purchase any of those cards that they have gained experience points for, and then they will move on to the action phase where they are moving around these different planets attempting to conquer and overthrow as much as possible, and then they will conquest where they will actually gain control of the different planets. Players will go through these turns, moving down the turn marker here, and finally after that I'm going to get a bit into what combat looks like, because that's where things really get exciting in this game. So for example, if we had this team here move into Synthoria and they attempted a combat here, we would have this be the attacking team and this as the defending team. And the first step of combat is to target. So they would specifically target who they are attacking, and then after that you would roll. When you roll, your base dice are 6 for attacking and 5 for defending. Now there are different abilities and cards that could augment this, but just to show you an example of what would happen with this, before any cards or anything like that is applied, you would roll these dice. So we will roll, sorry, trying to roll both of these at once is a lot, but we will roll these and we will roll these. And you will add both of them up because, wow, this is a lot of damage. You will add both of them up because both of them can do both damage and defense. The defensive die do have attacks on them, as you can see, so damage will be dealt all around when these dice are rolled. After that is the reroll step, where players are able to reroll any dice that they choose to do so. The attacking player here would, I think, leave them as is because that is a whole lot of attacks. There's no defense, but it is attacking for quite a lot. But over there, here you can see our defensive player does have 1 miss on this die here. Everything else I think we'll leave as is, but we'll reroll this one, and here we go. Oh. Okay, well, it was another miss, which is not great, but after that, you would move on to the defender support action. So if the defender did have any cards in their hand that were a defensive type card, they would be able to play those now to hopefully add to their defense during this part. After that, the attacker would be able to add combat action and support action cards because they are the attacker. So they're able to play both combat action cards as well as support action cards to augment the battle. After that, damage will be resolved, so again, just to make this simple, assuming that no cards were played, just to look at the dice directly, you can see here that this player would be doing 1, 2, 3, 4 damage and defending for 1, and this player would be doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and defending for 0. So this player would take 4 damage, and this one would take 8, and the battle would be resolved. Now with that, that makes combat seem very simple, but as I said, there are a lot of things that can change how combat resolves. So first I'm going to go over the different types of cards that there are, and then we're going to take a look at the different abilities that the contenders have. So here we have a weapon, which is Fire Breath. It would cost 5 XP, so it is a bit expensive, and when you purchase a weapon, you have to attach it to a contender immediately. And then this is the attached Unrivaled Contender adds 1 double strike to their final combat value, or if it was an Awakened Contender, it would add 2 to their final combat value. So for example, here where that roll was very, very strong, they would be able to add a potential 4 damage if they were an Awakened character. Another example of a card would be this one, which is a combat action, which again, the attacking character would be able to do, and it would cost 4 XP. This one is Fortification, which is if your final combat value has 4 or more shields, conquer or overthrow the planet you are occupying. So this is a way for you to conquer or overthrow a planet that you are on without meeting their specific conditions, but instead using a combat action to do so. Here is one that would be a support action, which means either player would have been able to play it during that combat, and it costs 1 XP from the shadows. If your final combat value has 3 or more double swords, the opposing contender loses 2 health after combat damage is resolved. So this would be a great example, again, for that red player to have played, because they did have a lot of those double hits, and they would be able to use this ability. Now, the last card that I will show you is a non-combat action card. These happen when you are not in combat, and this would cost 1 XP to purchase, Good Karma. If you gain 5 XP or more this turn, gain an additional 3 XP. So this is something where you would pay 1 to purchase it, and then hopefully use it to gain an additional 2 XP when you're gaining that 3 because you paid 1 for it, and it's definitely a good boon for you to use when you are not in combat. And now looking at the contenders that we have here in front of us, you can see here on an unrivaled side, we have Harmonisworn, and his ability, which you always have on your unrivaled side that is available to you, his would be Environmental Mastery. Whenever Harmonisworn is engaged in combat on a planet you control, add 1 double hit to your final combat value. So that's an example where you would be able to be quite a bit stronger as long as you are having combats in the planets that you control, but that's a great way for you to be defending where you are and hopefully not be overthrown. And looking over here at Fangin, who is also another destroyer, his special ability is Wisdom of the Ages. Whenever Fangin is engaged in combat, restore 2 health to a contender you control if you choose not to reroll any dice during your reroll step. So if you do choose not to reroll anything, that's a way that you can restore health to your different contenders, and his different abilities would be Celestial Breath, add 4 single hits to your final combat value. If opposing contender has a weapon attached with a cost of 4 XP or less, send it to the discard pile after combat. It does have a cooldown of 3, which means you won't be able to use it for quite a bit, but that is really detrimental to your opponent because you'll be taking away something that they sought out and paid for and were planning on using. Then there's also Reflective Guard. Add 1 double hit to your final combat value for each shield you roll during this combat phase, and this also has a cooldown of 3. So you can see where these are very strong abilities, but they take quite a bit to be able to come back. Now, your different contenders are able to die. Their base health is 20 and they cannot go over 20, and when they start the game they do have 20 health. However, throughout the game they will lose health and die. And when they do come back, they will come back at 15 health and lose any weapons that were attached to them. Now, finally, I'm going to go back to how you gain Gambit points, because the first player to 20, as long as there are still rounds in the game, will win the game. So to be able to gain Gambit points, you'll be doing different things throughout the game, such as conquering. When you conquer a planet, you'll be able to gain 2 points, but if you overthrow a planet, you would gain 1 Gambit point. You would also gain a Gambit point when you deal 5 or more damage to an opposing contender, but only once per combat. You'll gain 1 when you collectively restore 6 or more health to contenders you control, again once per turn. You can gain 1 gambit point for defeating an opposing unrivaled contender, or 2 gambit points for defeating an awakened contender. So as you awaken contenders, they do provide more points for players as well when they beat them, but they're definitely more powerful for you as well. Then at the end of the game, you'll get bonus gambit points for each awakened contender you control, so having them awakened at the end of the game, each planet you control when the game ends, for each home planet you control, so not only a point for the planet you control, but if it's a home planet to one of your contenders, you would gain that as well. You can see here that Harmonisaurn is from Synthoria, so that's where they would want to own by the end of the game. And then you would gain 1 for every 5 XP that you have of unspent XP, and 1 for every 5 XP worth of armory cards that are in your hand. So for those armory cards that you purchase, they are worth a bit of gambit points toward the end of the game if you don't use them. One of the most interesting things is how many different contenders there are. There are so many to choose from because you're playing with 3 every time that you play, so they have a whole lot for you to choose from. I highly suggest checking out their link down below to see their game found page to see all of the different contenders that there are, but there will also be a playthrough on this channel between Alex and I, so you'll get to see not only more of the contenders, but how they interact and how they can build up throughout the game. Thank you to Rising Empire Studios for sponsoring this video. I am Professor Meg, and I will see you all next time. Bye!